Well, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Senator Jacinta Price. Senator Price was born in Darwin and grew up in Alice Springs. Her mother, Bess Price, a Walpiri woman and former... Give her a round of applause. Her mother, Bess Price, and former Country Liberal Party MP for the Northern Territory, lived within an original Walpiri structured environment through a kinship system on Aboriginal land. Her father, David, was born in Newcastle. Before politics, and hopefully in her spare time, she also is a musician and has released her own albums, Dry River in 2013, and has worked in children's television, but began her political service as a councillor for Alice Springs in 2015, and in August 2021 served as Deputy Mayor in her last year as councillor. In 2021, she was nominated as the Country Liberal Party's candidate for the Northern Territory and won the Senate seat in 2022. This week, she was appointed to the role of Shadow Cabinet Minister for Indigenous Australians. A quote from her maiden speech encompasses the Senator's service and leadership. My vision, my hope, my goal is that we can effect change that will see women, children and other victims in these communities become as safe as any of those living in Sydney, Melbourne or any other Australian city. My goal is to halt the pointless virtue signalling and focus on solutions that brings real change, that changes the lives of Australia's most vulnerable citizens. Solutions that give them real lives, not the enduring nightmare of violence and terror they currently live in. Please welcome my colleague, Senator Jacinta Nampijimpa Price.
Thank you.
So I might just ask Jacinta to speak about her time growing up, speak about her family, speak about her time in the Northern Territory. This is the first representative I've had from Politics in the Pub that is from the Northern Territory, and what a great representative we have here. But Jacinta, over to you, and then we'll have some questions and answers straight after that as well. If you are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander and you've got a particular question tonight too, I'd love you to ask as well, but everyone will be welcome to ask questions and we'll get through as many as we can. So over to you, Senator Price. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much. What an incredible welcome. I do have to say that Queensland is my favourite state. It's because I truly feel there's a lot of love out there, and I feel very supported by Queenslanders whenever I'm here visiting, and even walking down the street. Quite often I get pulled up by a Queenslander with some words of encouragement, so I'm very grateful for that. It has been a big week, a rather big week this week. Not particularly planned in any particular way, apart from maybe a couple of things like the launching of the ad for the No campaign last night. And I guess I want to acknowledge my husband, Colin Lilly, who has bravely stepped out in support of me as his wife and as a new Australian. It was just earlier this year that he became a citizen, finally. It took some convincing. We've been together well over a decade now, and he's finally made that commitment, but he loves this country. He loves it so much so that he's prepared to appear in an ad alongside me. So I thank him for that, and on his behalf, he thanks Australia and Australians for making him feel so welcome as a new Australian to this country. And look, I mean, my journey has always been about first and foremost creating understanding between us as Australian citizens, As you know, my mother is a Warrapari woman, my father is a white Australian. I'm a product of reconciliation, right?
Yep.
You can't get any more product of reconciliation than me. And you know, I've grown up in a household and in a community filled with love, filled with the knowledge and understanding that we are all Australians. Some of us are more marginalised than others, but ultimately we all belong to this country. We're all part of this country. I grew up understanding, my elders taught me that if you're conceived on this land in Australia, your baby spirit leapt from the ground, from the dreaming story of that place into your mum's belly, and gave you your spiritual connection, your personal dreaming. And they taught me that it didn't matter if you were black, white or brindle. You still belong to this land. You're still spiritually connected to this land. That's what I was brought up understanding and knowing, and that is the culture that I was born into. And so I recognise that we all belong to this country as Australians, and we've all contributed to this wonderful society that is ours. Whether we are from the first people who were here, whether we come from, you know, my ancestors were also dispossessed of their land and brought to this country in chains on boats. Whether you come from the convict class, whether you come from the settlers, the migrant community, we have all contributed to this nation, ourselves personally, through our own journeys, through our family stories, through our communities. And we belong to the greatest nation on the face of the earth as far as I'm concerned. We are the land of opportunity. You can become whatever it is you want to become, whatever you put your mind to. If my mother can be born under a tree in the middle of what is now the Yundamu airstrip, but it was bush back then. If she can be born under a tree and grow up in you know, a traditional setting known as a humpy, and if her first language was not English, English was probably her third language. If she grew up in a situation like that, if she can escape the cultural pressures of being forced into an arranged marriage and become a second wife, and say, you know what, I'm going to rebel and I'm going to make the choices I want to choose for my life, and I want an education and I want a future that I choose. If she can do that and then go on to earn a university degree and go further than that, become a minister of the Crown in this country, you can do anything. You can do anything. The opportunities exist. They exist. And I proudly now stand here as her daughter, as now the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, because Australia has given that to me. Australia has entrusted me with that role for the benefit, certainly, of our marginalised. So I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for my wonderful colleague Luke here. You didn't tell me it was going to be, you know, such
they're keen here.
such a wonderful audience. But no, I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for the team of people that I get to work with in Parliament. I know that we have a strong group of individuals from all parts of this country who are there for the purpose of serving the Australian people to bring about the best outcomes. And that's what we're fighting for on a daily basis. I'm grateful for the fact that, you know, when I talk about opportunities, I like to smash stereotypes a lot. I like to smash the idea that, you know, and certainly in places like my community, that all we have is a bunch of racist rednecks and victim Aboriginal people. I like to smash those kinds of stereotypes that we, the everyday Australian, knows are simply not true about our nation. And there's so many factors that suggest otherwise, that these are lies. For example, the Northern Territory, if you like. The fact that we had the ABC come and report on our community wrongfully and then tell the country exactly those stereotypes. And disregard the fact that the Northern Territory voted to our federal parliament 3 Aboriginal women. 3 Aboriginal women. And our token white fella.
Well done, Luke.
No, seriously, let's look at the facts here. Let's look at the reality of the situation. You know, we have 4 representatives who are in federal parliament from the Northern Territory, and 3 of them are Indigenous women. And not only that, but in fact, actually, Territory is kicking some real big goals because we have got a 4th member of parliament, Senator Karen Little, Senator for South Australia, who is originally from Alice Springs also. There must be something in that desert air, right? But that is testament to our nation as a nation that isn't racist, as a nation that wants what's best for all Australians, but particularly our most marginalised Australians. There is a lot of very goodwill out there, a lot of goodwill for Indigenous Australia. And for a long time, we have been doing things the wrong way because of the way we've been framing our nation in a way that's simply untrue, that us everyday Australians know is untrue. And what we haven't done is actually focus on certainly where the marginalisation exists. In my previous role as the Director of Indigenous Research at the Centre for Independent Studies, one of my papers actually looked further into where the gap actually exists. And it doesn't tell us that as Aboriginal people we are inherently marginalised because of our race, that it's our race that determines whether we're marginalised or not. That's not what we found. What we found was that it is based on regional Australia, remote, and even further remote. Those people in those parts of the country, as the further you get out of the city, the more marginalised Australians become. And that is everybody. But particularly so for those in remote communities whose first language is not English. You know, they're not brought, in terms of education, they don't have the same sort of education that perhaps migrant children have with English as a second language. There's not that sort of level of focus. It's always about their race and culture. Instead of going, no, these are Australian children. They're capable of learning like any other Australian children. So we've got a situation where we have our most marginalised who are marginalised because there are language barriers. Certainly there are cultural differences, absolutely, but shouldn't be treated different otherwise. I've also said that if you want to see socialism working remarkably well in this country, all you have to do is go out to a remote community. That's what socialism looks like when it's successful, right? Why do we want that for the rest of our country? Why would we want people welfare dependent who have lost the will to get up in the morning, to provide for their families and to want something more, something better than what is currently on offer in those communities? And having grown up, despite what my detractors might lie about me, I have very much grown up in connection with many remote communities. I was born and first lived on the Tiwi Islands. My baby spirit comes from the top end. I have Yirrkala Bay, Jickabanga, crocodile dreaming from the top end, and deep salt water dreaming. I moved to the Kimberley with my parents when I was very little for a few months. I have family there. We moved then to Alice Springs. My life growing up was my childhood spent out bush with my family, hunting with my aunts and my grandmother and my cousins. I've been connected to many of the communities that surround Alice Springs, whether it's with my Aranda family, my Arnamo family, the different connections that I have there. And I've grown up understanding the complexities I've grown up seeing and witnessing acts of violence. I've grown up comforting loved ones who have experienced incredibly horrible circumstances. And I've done my best to support young'uns in my family and taking on children within my extended family. I know what's going on. And I also know that when you stand up and speak the truth, it rocks the boat. And a lot of people get really upset about that. But you can't begin to solve some of our toughest issues if you first fail to recognise that they exist in the first place and why they exist in the first place. And as long as there are little vulnerable ones without getting that start in life, it is incumbent on me to fight for their rights, even in the face of those who attempt to want to bring me down. I've got to be there for them, because who else is going to be if I'm not? And I know that the goodwill of Australians wants the same thing. And we have to do this together. We have to do this together, but we can't do it divided along the lines of race to empower bureaucracy within our constitution and disregard the marginalised and marginalise them further through that process, which is why I am voting no. And there are, despite what my detractors try to say, there are many Aboriginal people, because we're individuals in our own right, believe it or not. We're individuals in our own right, and many of us can in fact think for ourselves. Would you believe it? And again, it's one of those stereotypes, those racial stereotypes, to suggest that as a race of people, we all somehow think the same. It's nonsense. We don't do it to any other race of people in this country. So why do we continue to do it to Aboriginal Australians? Why does the media continue to do it to Aboriginal Australians? Why are Aboriginal people told you've got to think and act and behave in a particular way, and you must live within the confines of your own culture, because I think there's some romantic view about what that looks like. That's not how an Australian citizen should have to be treated and should be expected to live their lives in 2023. All those Indigenous leaders who are rightfully elected to their positions, whether it's in local government, whether it's in state, federal parliament, why then are their voices somehow now redundant, even though they have gone the hard yards to get to those positions? Why then should they have to take advice from an unelected body, or a body we don't even know the detail of, really, an unelected body from within the Constitution, because apparently they are of the understanding of what really needs to go on the ground. No, let's not make a bureaucracy that we have to handball the hard issues to. We need to take responsibility. I know Luke's one of those that takes responsibility to make sure that we listen to our constituents of all different backgrounds, that we listen to all our constituents, and we have to go back and fight on their behalf in Parliament. That's our job to do that. You, the taxpayer, is paying us to do that.
Yes.
This is exactly what was asked of us. The delegation of Indigenous Australians that I brought to Parliament House, that Labor failed to come to listen to, that the Greens failed to come to listen to, but the independent Teals came, well, they didn't come to listen to. Not a single other party, or aside from, well, probably from One Nation, actually came to listen to that delegation in Parliament. One of those representatives of the delegation was Vincent Lingiari's grandson. And they weren't interested in what they had to say. And they did say, they said, You, our politicians, we pay you with our tax dollars to represent us. You need to start doing that and to stop being afraid of being called racist when you're representing the views of Australian citizens. That's what we were asked to do. And that's what our democracy is built on. So why would we then want to dismantle the current democratic system that we have in place to suit those who have been at the helm of Indigenous disadvantage for decades, and clearly they have failed. So when someone in a, whether it's an appointed or self-appointed leadership position fails over and over and over again, it's probably time they stepped aside and let someone else come along to do things differently. That's what hasn't been done, not inserting those individuals into our constitution. To suggest it hasn't been done to set up a bureaucracy, it has been done before, but inserting it in the constitution, yeah, we haven't tried that because it's very, very, very dangerous. It's about then giving 3% of the population, well, it's probably not even going to be 3% of the population, it's going to be 25 representatives who are supposed to be representatives of 3% of the population, make determinations about policy, about laws that are going to affect every single Australian. Every single Australian will be affected by this. And in my family, I have 4 sons. One of those sons, he's my stepson, he is still my son. He is not Indigenous. Why should my family be divided? Why should the 3 that I gave birth to be considered more important and worthy of an extra vote than my stepson? Why should that be the case in this country? That is division. Yep. And if we look at the world's history, if we see the way in which the world, on the world stage, why we've had world wars, we know that's come along because of segregation, racial division. This is not the recipe for success, this is the recipe for disaster. Having spoken to myself, ambassadors from different parts of the world, some of them say to me privately, why is Australia doing this? Especially in Europe, why is Australia doing this? We have laws now in Germany where you cannot make determinations on the basis of race, and for very good reason. So why is Australia hurtling toward this referendum in the way it is? And as my husband said, I will not stand for a line down my family. And I won't stand for division in a country that I love, that has given me every single opportunity without a constitutionally enshrined voice to become the woman I am today, to stand in front of you and have the wonderful support that I have. So thank you very much.
So, Senator, I asked you a question earlier today about your name, Senator Jacinta Nampijimpa Price. Could you, I said, is that your middle name?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Could you explain to everyone perhaps just about that quickly?
Yeah, sure. So, and this is the wonderful thing about part of the work that I have done in a previous life is to work as a cross-cultural educator, to talk about certainly my culture and surrounding cultures in Central Australia, for the benefit of creating understanding. So Nampijimpa, and that's, I know there is difficulty with saying it sometimes, but I encourage everyone when they do have a go. It's wonderful to hear, it being used. But Nampijimpa is my skin name, and what that means is that in Warrnambool, it's a kinship structure. So we have kinship structures and we have name categories, if you like. The purpose of the skin name structure is to help you understand who you're related to, how you're related to them. in my case, there's over 2,000 Warrapuri people. So we all belong to one of these categories. So we have an 8-name system and a male and female version of each name. So Nampijimpa is my skin name. I'm not the only Nampijimpa. There are lots of other Nampijimbas. I regard them as sisters. And Jampijimpas are my brothers. So all women start with an N, men start with a J. Now, that's the first part over. I won't test you all, but so my first choice of marriage, right? This is very important. You have to understand who you can and can't marry. There's rules around that. My first choice of marriage is the Japangari category. So my husband, well, you know, I roped him in. I somehow conned him into, you know, being married to a Warrapuri woman. So therefore, even though he's a Scotsman, he's automatically become, he is a Japangari. That is how he is related to by my family. Japangari is his skin name. So because we are the correct choice in marriage for our categories, our sons are Japanangas. If we had daughters, they would be Napanangas. Women go in a cycle of 4 and men go back and forth in 2. So I'm Nampijimpa. My daughters are Napananga. My grandmothers, my daughter's daughters, and also my grandmothers are Nakamara. Nakamara's daughters are Nore, which is my mother's category. Men go back and forth. And this is one of a very highly mathematical structure. And I could sit down with some of the older people in my family and they'd be able to rattle off on the top of their head how they're related to about 100 people. Give them a couple more minutes, it'll be 500. They'll know how to do it. But Nampijimpa is who I am, it's part of my identity. So when I'm talking with my family, they call me Nampijimpa, or Nampin for short. So that's how we talk to one another. When we greet each other, we usually greet each other using our skin name titles. So that's why Jacinta Nampijimpa Price is there. Nampijimpa Price is important to me because it is who I am. And believe it or not, it was my Scottish husband who was adamant that I had to make sure I put it there, that it now sits in my office door, and that's how I am addressed. And of course he said, because for the purpose of real understanding and reconciliation. That's what it's about, creating understanding. Well, why is this the case? Well, this is the case because of this. And actually the other thing we do as Warrapuri people is we tend to hunt and gather other people, you know, white fellas and that sort of thing. That's why I've got a Scottish husband. So when we do that, we would often, you know, we give others skin names because actually there is no word for an unrelated friend in Warrapuri. Is the concept of it is beyond us, you know, in traditional terms. So everyone ends up with a skin name, and we end up widening our family. You know, I know as a kid, the whole world came through Alice Springs, and my mother, you know, she wanted to make everyone family. So I have a Japanese sister in Hong Kong, living in Hong Kong. I have a French Canadian brother. I have family members dotted all over the world as a result of adopting people into our kinship structure. But what's most important, I guess, is the fact that had my father not been given that skin name when he first moved to Yuendamu in the 70s, it was given to him by my mother's sister's husband, which made them brothers. If he hadn't been given that particular skin name, he might not have had the opportunity to then later fall in love with my mother. So thank goodness for that, otherwise this product of reconciliation wouldn't be standing here before you.
So in federal parliament you get 30 seconds to ask a question and ministers get 3 minutes to answer. I'm going to give you 25 seconds to ask a question and I'm going to give the shadow minister 2 minutes to answer, all right? So we can get through as many as we can. So there's a hand up the back here. We've got a roving microphone. If you can say your name, suburb, just there, Janet. Yep, gentleman here. And yeah, quite a few questions, okay? So, yep, 25 seconds, go.
Okay, my name's Neil Finlay. For the benefit of an old old, white, slightly deaf fella who wants to bring credit and honour to your name. Can you explain carefully how to pronounce your name?
Certainly. Nampijimpa.
Nampijimpa.
See, how easy was that? I will say that our p is pronounced halfway between a b and a p. So nampi, and then our j is sort of between a j and a t. So Nampijimpa.
Nampijimpa. Very good.
Nampijimpa, yes.
Well, that was impressive. 10 seconds and a 30-second answer. Okay, so we do have Sky News here tonight filming, which could be used for Sky programming. So if you don't want to ask a question, then, you know, just be aware of that. Thank you, Sky, for attending. Yep, okay.
And congratulations on your promotion.
Thank you.
And going by the demographics of the people here tonight, how did you come to get the under 30 vote?
Yeah. Look, social media. Yeah. Social media, perhaps. You know, and you know what? It's incumbent upon you folk to talk to your grandchildren.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sons and daughters and grandchildren and family conversations is really important as well. I do know, so one of my sons is studying at university and surprisingly quite, I'm quite happily as well, he is having conversations with his fellow university peers about a lot of these issues. And despite the fact that I think that all universities are, you know, completely left and trying to ideologically impose their views on our children, I think I have much more faith in young people than what I think, you know, what I otherwise have previously thought, given the conversations that my son, well, two of my sons have with their peers in university. And I think what we have to do is, by some point, young people have to have something to rebel against, right? So it's only so long that the ideology of the left can continue to go down the road it's going by. And I think what's important is to encourage young people, and I guess I did it today. Luke took me to a local school to speak with some young girls. And the idea is to encourage young people to start asking questions again. Ask questions. Don't take everything on face value. Don't believe everything that you read on Facebook, obviously, but because that's about self-empowerment. Knowledge is about self-empowerment, and that's really, really important for our young people. So I will continue to encourage young people to do that. I'm also, you know, very heartened by the fact that I'm hearing from my sons that some intellectual conversation is being had outside the lecture room, mind you, for young people who are interested in a lot of this way of thinking, and a lot of young Indigenous people in universities are questioning things as well, which I'm very pleased about, which is what is being reported back to me.
You are so needed. You are so needed. I've got control. I've been a police officer for 23 years, working with Aboriginal police throughout Queensland, training them, looking after them. I'm an Aboriginal man from Tasmania. My daughter identifies as Aboriginal. I've worked in Canada with First Nations people. Luke Howarth helped us out with Project BIA. Most of our students work for Aboriginal, 75% success rate, Project BIA. 2 branches in Canberra. I'm now a full-time senior teacher in all the schools around here. You are so needed. I work with the most at-risk people in Queensland. It's just an anointing. I worked with Uncle Albert, our first senior Indigenous officer. I'm familiar. Luke is needed. We need this. I'm at Deception Bay High on contract, a senior teacher, a young Aboriginal girl. She says, what are you doing? I said, we're going to do something. She said, we need to do something about domestic violence. I worked at Sherwood as a police officer, Mervyn as a school teacher, and I stay with people in the community. My mother, in her funeral, most of the people from the the Bundaberg community, so I understand what you're talking about. It's really, there's so much. I'm on my way to the car and run by, and a lady says, "You're retired Sergeant Bill, aren't you?" My husband's a trauma trained guy between Nambour and Ipswich, and he's done 18 jobs in the last little while. That's 18 people between Nambour and Ipswich. And he takes over the train when someone's run over. So we have a negative thing, and you get to learn what's happening in the community. You are needed in a positive way through education, the 7 hills. And I would like to talk to you later about what you have.
Question.
So
Question.
But I commend you for being elected.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay.
I've worked in most schools between Bundaberg and Coomera, Boston, and I would like to make you known to the community, Sherburne, Harvey Bay and Bundaberg, because we need to make you known how the balance is. Is that okay?
We can certainly look at opportunity to come and visit. Absolutely, I'd love that.
We've got a great member up there, Keith Pitt too, the member of the Hinkler. He's in Jacinta's team as well.
Yes.
Okay, let's keep it 30 seconds or 25 seconds down here. Yep, name and question. Here first, yep.
Jacinta, thank you for a very inspiring talk. As a medical practitioner, I congratulate you for your stance on child safety, and I congratulate you even more for coming out on top of David Spears at his most possibly toxic for the years so far. Sunday morning was a real revelation. Can I ask you how you defend yourself against what must be accusations of spearheading the stolen generation Mark II?
I respond with the truth.
That's it.
That deserves a clap. Yep.
I respond with the truth, and again, it comes down to being well aware of when children are being neglected, and when you know of these circumstances, and when I've had foster parents come to me with their hearts broken and tears in their eyes because they have fought to maintain custody of children that Child Protection Agency have decided need to be reunified with family because somebody has put their hand up and said, "I'm kin." And when the foster parents know that the situation that they're likely to go back in is very dangerous for them, where they know they will be neglected, where they know it's in a household that is potentially connected to someone who has perpetrated sexual abuse before, you can understand what it must feel like when, if your own children, of course, are removed from you, to be put into a situation like that. That is what I'm fighting to rectify. And Aboriginal kids, because of the policies of the past, the stigma now attached to the idea of removing an Aboriginal child, we're up against it, and these kids are up against it. And I don't know if many of you read about the article of the young man who wanted to be adopted. It was fighting to be adopted. Why? How is it in Australia in 2023? You've got more likelihood of adopting a kid from overseas than you do adopting a child from our own backyard to give them an opportunity at life. So when you hear these harrowing stories, I just know that I have to fight for this. I have to fight. I mean, we've had situations in my own family where we've had a child removed from within our own family and put into the care of a foster parent, and like they're not Indigenous, but so what? And then the agency has stepped in, supposedly because they prioritise this child's need for connection to culture and land over their need to have their human rights upheld. And our family have turned around and fought that. Our family fought the agency and said, no, we want this child to remain in this situation that is upholding their human rights. And I know people, frontline workers, I know police who have worked within the Child Abuse Task Force they themselves have been foster parents, so they know who's who in the community. And when their child has been removed from them and put into a situation where they absolutely know they will be sexually abused again, they have fought that system. And then what's happened is those kids have been returned in the end anyway because they've been re-traumatised. And when the Prime Minister says to me that I need to come forward and report this, and when Dave Spears says to me, well, haven't you reported this? And I'm trying to explain, no, the first responders have done their due diligence. They have already reported this. This is the failings of the system that currently exists. And this is why we need a Royal Commission. And why the ABC will try to make me out to be a liar, try to make Peter Dutton to be a liar, and not investigate this further, like they do when accusations of sexual assault are made against conservative white men. They follow that through and they believe those victims, right? They believe those victims when in those circumstances it might not have, it's not even been proven. But they won't do the same for Aboriginal children who are experiencing sexual abuse, who have experienced sexual abuse. So my invitation still stands to the Prime Minister. He is welcome to come and sit in my community and listen to the people that are experiencing this firsthand, and then he can make a determination. But until then, he can keep his mouth closed.
I got a question from Brett at Aspley, and then I'll go straight down here. Brett at Aspley says, if the voice gets up, I want to know what happens to all the other multiple Indigenous organisations that exist and that we as a taxpayer spend hundreds of millions of dollars on every year to close the gap.
I'd like to know too. I'm hoping to be able to, from my new position, fight to get a better understanding of exactly where the funds are being spent to alleviate disadvantage, to overcome adversity for Indigenous Australians in this country. I would seriously like to know how it's being spent, where it's being spent, whether it's being effective or not, whether there is overlap, whether we have too many organisations that exist. These are all questions that I want answered, and these are all questions I'll be seeking to get answered now in my new role. Because while it might be suggested that we can't keep doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result, I agree. And what we haven't done is to audit that spending, is to understand who is accountable for the failures through those expenses that we keep incurring year on and year on. Before we launch ourselves into certainly the idea of a permanent fixture in our constitution that will no doubt cost billions of dollars to fund again on top of everything else. They're answers that I seek to get. They're questions that I seek to get answers for in this new role.
Okay. Name, question.
Welcome to Senator Jacinta. David and I are both ex-Territorians, 30 years, 40 years, and card-carrying members of the CLP.
Oh.
Darwin Branch. David worked as a CEO of Shire and a GBM in the intervention, and I'm a remote area nurse and clinic manager. Two things. One is that trying to report child abuse or trying to sexual abuse, often I got told they will pull my permit or they will sack me. That's one of the issues. I'm not sure how you can address that, because that comes within the people of the community. And secondly, David with the intervention, we found it worked really well. John Howard's intervention originally, but it's been watered down terribly by Labor.
Yes.
If you happen to get back into a government again. Could you see that being sort of revamped?
Okay. Just repeat the question roughly.
Yeah. So, look, you're right about the circumstances in communities, and there has been absolutely a culture of silence to keep everything under wraps. And I know frontline workers like yourself across the Territory who have had the same experience, who find it very difficult to actually report in the first place. And I know that reporting, in terms of reporting, there is a lot of underreporting that goes on as well. So what I'm really concerned with is why is the peak body for that advocates for the lives of Indigenous children in this country trying to diminish what the reality of is on the ground, the circumstances on the ground. Why are they trying to play it down? That doesn't speak to your experience or the experience of many in remote communities. What I do know is that community safety is a huge issue, and I'll be looking certainly at ways to be able to do that and to give the opportunity for certainly frontline workers, victims in those communities, to be heard, so they're not silenced and allow for that abuse to continue.
Thank you.
Jacinta, my name is Chris. Welcome to our bit of paradise here. My question's about the gap. A couple of months ago I drove from Adelaide to Darwin, and amongst other things, went through the towns of Elliot and Pine Creek, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And I've had a look at the 17 measures that the Productivity Commission keeps on the gap, which to me seem to be going in the right direction. And so my question is, what is the real gap that would aid people who live in Elliot and close that between them and who, and how do we get there?
Well, that goes back to my previous work with the Centre for Independent Studies and looking at actually where the gap exists, where the marginalisation exists. Our focus has been on, painting all of Aboriginal Australians with the same brush and suggesting we're all inherently marginalised because of our race, which is simply not true. And instead of saying, I would even, why this government doesn't do its own research to actually pinpoint where the marginalisation is. I mean, it's a bit like when you go to a doctor, right? You don't say, if you're feeling pain, you go to the site where the pain is. You don't go, it's all over, so I'm going to rub myself with painkiller all over. No, you go to the site to deal with the issue. And unfortunately, because of ideology, that's what we haven't done previously, but that's what we need to do, because there are a lot of Indigenous Australians who are doing really, really well, much like other Australians. But then also, when you suggest the whole race is marginalised, you forget that there are other people in Australia that aren't Indigenous that are also marginalised. And I think our focus should be wholly and solely on supporting our most marginalised.
Jacinta, just quickly with the voice debate. What I'm seeing from the Prime Minister and others is they're talking a lot about recognition now.
Yeah.
It's a simple ask, and he's talking a lot about recognition, but not about the voice in the Constitution. Have you noticed that? What's he trying to hide? Why hasn't he answered the Leader of the Opposition's questions?
Absolutely. You will notice the language is changing again. So the previous language wasn't working. Let's switch up the tone. Let's talk about, this is a modest proposal. It's an invitation by the First Nations people. Well, I don't know what First Nations people he's talking about, because I'm not First Nations. I believe they're Canadians. They're on the other side of the world somewhere. But also now saying it's about recognition and consultation. That's all. Well, as far as I know, I think Indigenous Australians are some of the most consultated people on the face of the earth. So, it's not like it's something that hasn't been done before. It's not like Aboriginal Australians don't have a voice that can be heard. That there are representative bodies out there that purport to represent many of those voices. It's nonsense, and don't be fooled by, well, even when the wording came out, I think he was having a little tear and a little cry. And then when asked why he was crying, he had to actually think on the spot, hang on, why am I crying? And then there was some kind of story about, we went to school with a kid who was Indigenous, but he didn't identify, and we just need to recognise. Okay, that's... Yeah, I didn't think that was something to get worked up and cry about, but otherwise, Australians aren't silly. Australians aren't silly when the questions aren't being answered and they're being sidestepped, and instead you get emotional blackmail. You know that it's a terrible idea to vote yes in this referendum.
I have a concern about the young ones with the voice, because I'm hearing stories about university lecturers telling them during the lectures that they must vote yes. It's a great concern. I've actually seen footage, so it's definitely happening out there. So I just wanted to get your response, because I know you're obviously very concerned about the young ones and what's happening.
Yeah, and that is a huge concern, as we know that the ideology that's being thrust on kids in universities. I actually, to be honest, I don't know how to counteract that unless I'm actually physically in universities myself to do that. The other thing is, young people have suggested to me, you need to hammer those social media platforms that young people are on, because they've got a 10-second attention span. They're taking everything in. I don't want to go near TikTok, but I think they're the ways that you can reach a young audience. Targeted is through social media. That really is going to have to be the weapon.
I just got a question from Belle from Deception Bay. Belle says, most of our birthing centres on country have been closed, and women, no matter their race, just as you've touched on tonight, are now needing to travel thousands of kilometres into the city to birth their babies, often leaving their family, staying in a hospital or hotel, and weeks alone and birthing, you guessed it, alone. Is there anything that can be done at your level to reopen our birthing centres and go back to training and equipping our on-country midwives so that women don't have to uproot their life and birth alone in a system that does not support their culture, values or beliefs?
Thank you for that question, and this is certainly an issue that in the Nationals Party room we are very concerned with, not just birthing but health practitioners and the availability of those medical people and facilities out in regional areas across Australia. This is an area that my colleague Anne Webster is particularly passionate about as well through her portfolio, and something that we are certainly holding this government to account on in terms of not cutting those resources in regional and remote Australia. It's happening not just in terms of health, the banking sector also. Our regions are being choked by this current government, and we are certainly doing everything we can to ensure things like birthing centres aren't going to be closed down. I mean, I know how important they are, and no mother should have to travel hundreds of kilometres to get to somewhere at the time of wanting to give birth to their child. So that is definitely a priority of ours at the moment.
Yes, Murray Gillen, may I thank you for your truth and integrity against what we get manipulated on the media. However, that's not what I want to ask. My main concern, well, it is a concern anyway, when you look around this audience, we are a very older generation. So what are we going to do about these younger people? And what I would like to suggest, as an expert with many years associated in work integrated learning, I'm going to ask you the question, what is possible from your position, and indeed from the opposition, and indeed when you're in government, how do you integrate, give the opportunity for younger people to gain working, I'll call it work, but experiential activity amongst the generations who are disadvantaged? Because that's the meaning that they will capture.
This is partly my fault because I did put out an invite to a few thousand people in my electorate, and I probably have email addresses from mostly older Australians, right? So, but when I put it on social media, you can get people from all over the place. I wanted to offer it to my electorate first, but good question, thank you.
Well, I know that a lot of schools have relationships with remote schools as well, and certainly, I guess, some of the private schools also in the cities. I would like to see more of that, more of those relationships between schools in our major cities and schools out in regional and remote Australia, where that exchange can take place. Barker College in Sydney is one of those schools. They have been setting up, they've got a Darkinjung College on the Central Coast, as well as their school in Hornsby. And in fact, well, one of my sons, he spent his senior years at boarding school there at Barker, but they've done a lot of work also in Central Australia and the Utopia region, and they bring their students into Central Australia, and they do a camp out and they go out to the community, and they actually get to have that experience of understanding a little bit about what life's like in some of those communities, because it can be a world apart, certainly. And I think it's important for our education system, where the opportunities exist, to be able to do those sorts of programs, and that's certainly something I'd encourage. I know the AIEF, the Australian Indigenous Education Foundation, they do a lot of remarkable work, but there are certainly already organisations and schools doing those sorts of things. They're certainly something that I would encourage going forward.
Just got a question from Brent in Bracken Ridge. Brent's asking, for all her issues, Lydia Thorpe is at least honest.
Yes.
The real goal is co-sovereignty. Do you think the Australian public are aware of the end agenda of the Uluru Statement, and why don't you make more of it this issue?
No, that's true. What you see is what you get with Lydia. If you recently, it was uncovered, there was an FRI document uncovered by one of the dialogues that took place at the minutes of that dialogue, which sort of outlines what the ideas are for the future. This voice referendum is simply the thin end of the wedge. Once that door is open, it's sort of open to all kinds of demands going forward. The whole sovereignty issue, the concept that Aboriginal Australians are not Australian, which obviously is untrue as far as I'm concerned. We're all part of this great country. The push for treaty, and even the idea of a separate Aboriginal state in this country, was highlighted within that dialogue. That's pretty extreme stuff now, but if we go back 5-10 years, we wouldn't think we'd be sitting here in this day and age where we've got this word woke, where we've got the concept of cancel culture. Everyone grab your pitchforks and go after that person. Nowadays it's like online and through media and social media. So it's not silly to think that this is what proponents of the voice are looking for further down the line, which is ultimately a divided, carved up Australia. We could give them Victoria. I apologise to my Victorian colleagues. I did not mean that. I did not mean that. I knew the Queensland would like that one. That was a joke. If there's any media listening in, you know, we used to have those things once upon a time. Australians were good at them. Jokes. But in all seriousness, this is what this voice proposal is. It is the thin end of the wedge. They will get that door open. The demands will flow from there. One of the working group members, Tony McAvoy, he was appointed as the Treaty Commissioner for the Northern Territory, a ridiculous position, I thought. We don't need treaties in the Northern Territory. We're all right. We don't need that nonsense. But in his report, in his treaty report, he's actually talking about creating separate language group governments throughout the territory. Can you imagine that? The language groups that exist now, I can rattle off a few on the top of my head, but that means there's 250 communities. So you may be talking about 100 different governments or something. Could you imagine? Who's going to pay for that? You know? Who's going to pay for that? Because I don't see the land councils coughing up royalties to, create those sorts of governments. Anyway, we can't go down that line. It gets worse and worse as it goes on. And it's unhealthy. It's unhealthy for Australians. I think of my kids. I think of my grandkids who aren't born yet. But I want an Australia that was more like the Australia I had in my childhood, not this crazy concept we're looking at ahead of us.
If you support the voice or you're unsure, ask a question, please. I'm quite happy to take a question to Senator Jacinta. It's quite okay. So, yep, I might go to you next. Yep. So this gentleman, then to this lady, and then I've probably got room for a couple more, then we've got to finish.
I congratulate you, Jacinta, on your promotion to the Shadow Cabinet. It's about time the the Liberal Party in Canberra got a little bit of fresh blood at the top. And in the presence of Jacinta here tonight, we can see we've got a very talented young lady who is equal to anyone else in that parliament and is the one who will lead the no vote in the referendum. This is what's been lacking. I came here tonight hoping to find out if Jacinta had any real plans, and I think she does, to fight this referendum. What she has said this evening is common sense. Yes.
Okay, it's almost a statement. I'll take that as a statement. Yep, name, suburb and question.
Kate Kelly, North Lakes. What I find really disappointing is the Liberal state branches of the Liberal Party. I'm not sure about the Nationals, but certainly the Liberal Party, all signing up for the yes vote. It's just horrifying. Is there any plans to get some sense into these state branches? They've just gone all woke.
I have conversations with my coalition, colleagues across the country. When I have the opportunity to, I speak to branches here and there to have those sorts of conversations. Certainly, I am absolutely heading up the No campaign, proudly, very proudly, and certainly my Liberal colleagues that want to champion the Yes campaign, well, they have to understand they're going to have to come up against me as well. I'm not taking this fight lightly because I don't feel like I want to be discriminated against or treated differently because I'm of Aboriginal heritage. I'm an Australian, and like a mum, I'll fight for my country like I fight for my children. So let that be a word of warning for those who want to take up the yes fight. I'm ready and waiting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Richard, one thing that bothers me is having two flags, and I imagine you standing in between the two flags and wonder which one you would head towards. As far as I'm concerned, the two flags are divisive, and I'm wondering whether you've had any thoughts about a unifying flag, a new Australian unifying flag.
Well, I mean, this flag here, I believe, represents me, right? I have a love for this flag. I have a soft spot for this flag, but ultimately, this is who I am, and this is the country that I'm part of. And I'm extremely proud of that flag, and anyone who suggests that anyone who wants to carry one of these flags is racist, that is absolute nonsense. It's backward thinking. We can't teach our children to not be proud of this country. That is criminal as far as I'm concerned. Why would you teach your child to be ashamed of who they are in one of the nation's greatest, in one of the country's greatest, in one of the world's greatest nations? Why would you do that to your child? Why would you allow for them to have self-doubt in their own identity? That's wrong, and we need to change that. It's not to say I'm not open to the idea of a new flag for Australians. I'm certainly open to that sort of idea if a competition went out, and I don't know how it would happen, but for now, this flag is the flag that represents my values.